Anyway, we've all known that Bryan Singer was trash for like a minute. But recently, The Atlantic published a piece written by Alex French and Maximilian Potter, who write for Esquire, by the way. It was a piece that was supposed to appear in Esquire, but then it got nixed by Esquire execs and ended up in The Atlantic. The piece is called Nobody is Going to Believe You, and it talks about Bryan Singer's sexual misconduct for the past 20 years, and it has interviews with some new alleged victims of his. So basically, he's back in the news. This is a long reported story, sort of like when the Harvey Weinstein piece rolled out, and now people are all of a sudden like, oh, Bryan Singer's horrible.
Yeah.
His GLAAD nomination, Bohemian Rhapsody's GLAAD nomination was rescinded.
I mean, it's interesting that it took this long into the Me Too kind of moment, because Bryan Singer, like when Harvey Weinstein happened, and immediately everyone is like, okay, Louis C.K. is next. Like you had a list of
the
dudes
word bank.
who you knew exactly who were going to be next, and like
Evan Rachel Wood, I remember, tweeted, "When's Bryan Singer?"
Yeah, so Bryan Singer was like one of the first ones, and it's been what, like 2 years now or a year and a half, like a while for this to kind of, and I don't know if it's because of Bohemian Rhapsody or we just had a bunch of people to get through before we could get to Bryan Singer.
Well, part of it too is I feel like pieces come out about Bryan Singer all the time, and no one really does anything about it. I mean, I remember living through when he was being sued, and it turns out that like the charges ended up being dropped, and so we sort of all just collectively didn't do anything with it because he's also not consistently in the press the way that a lot of other people are.
He's not famous in that same way. Like
Yeah.
that name recognition isn't quite there with Bryan's. Like
It's
you've
not
definitely
like Woody Allen.
Well, you've definitely seen a Bryan Singer movie, but you may not have realized it was a Bryan Singer movie.
The thing also happens to you when you move to LA and are a gay man. I moved here like 10 years ago, and I feel like, I mean, these people are obviously still around, but you always hear like, oh my God, I used to be at Bryan Singer's parties, and it's never with an air of like, and you should have been there. It was it was always an air of like, what was I doing there?
Right.
What was that? You know, so there's
like
an air of spookiness around him just anyway.
It's like you were at the pool party at A Nightmare on Elm Street. Just
right.
people
yes.
being slashed left and right. I used to work. This is horrifying. I used to work at the Coffee Bean
Oh, I remember.
in West Hollywood.
Ooh, how very Perez Hilton of you. That's where he used to do all his blogging. That's what I know. That's my iconic Coffee Bean imagery. Go ahead.
Yeah, my nemesis, who I don't think about, and yet he constantly tweets at me.
Oh,
that he
okay.
doesn't like me.
Oh, I blocked him like 2 years ago.
He's a mess.
Yeah.
But having worked at that Coffee Bean, Bryan Singer loved coming into the Coffee Bean on Santa Monica Boulevard to have quote-unquote business meetings. It would just be him and like 3 twinks ordering coffees. I think he loved a vanilla frappuccino, whatever those fucking things
Yeah,
were called.
I think it's like a frappe there or something.
Yeah, like I don't remember anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was there at least like twice a week.
Well, your boo has not responded to this well, Ira.
All right, yeah. So Rami Malek, who I love.
Yep.
He's a little button.
He snuck him on this board. Who, like, when I walked in, I was like, "What's he doing there?"
Well, to my Rami incarcerated, he had some bad responses.
He did.
To
a number of bad responses.
Number of bad responses to the new Bryan Singer allegations. He said that he wasn't aware of the allegations against Singer when he took on the project, and in a statement to the LA Times, he said, "As far as I knew, I was considered before Bryan was even attached. I think that the allegations and things were, believe it or not, honestly something I was not aware of, and that is what it is. Who knows what happens with that? But I think somehow we found a way to persevere through everything that was thrown our way."
I just want to say that the phrase "it is what it is" used to upset me a little bit, and every time I hear it, it escalates, and now I'm at like a borderline trauma place with "it is what it is."
It's also crazy to look at the Bryan Singer stuff as a difficulty thrown your way. The difficulty is for the victims of
Yes.
Bryan Singer. Nothing difficult. Like you
We were
lost a
able
director.
to persevere.
Yeah, like
Through
you
your
had
Oscar
nothing to-
nomination?
you had nothing to persevere through.
We know that they allegedly had a confrontational relationship throughout the filming of Bohemian Rhapsody, which makes it even weirder that he doesn't
Right.
want to like speak out about him. Like, obviously he did some shit on the set which pissed you off.
Right.
So why aren't you being vocal about it? Why are you,
Yeah,
maintaining this? It's obviously, because he wants to win the Oscar.
right.
Also, it's very strange that they had confrontations because in most ways, Bohemian Rhapsody is a by-the-book biopic. Like, what could you possibly be fighting about? Like,
I don't want to wear these teeth.
Yeah.
I mean, to that point, though, I think Rami's statements were bad, mostly because they're just dumb and we don't believe you. Like, you need more people, clearly. But really, Queen, like, by all accounts, the band had so much control over this film. Like, an unbelievable amount of control in every aspect of the film. And they're who I really want to ask about Bryan Singer. Because Rami Malek had a dumb response, especially we've had like a full year now for you to know that you're going to be asked about these things and to like come up with something coherent to say. But Queen presumably signed off on the director,
Right.
like very much so, and like
Yeah.
could have nixed a director if they didn't like him. And no one's asking them like, why did you all settle on Bryan Singer?
And it's kind of gross in retrospect, the idea that they made this documentary, they made this film, this biopic, which sort of, whitewashes Freddie Mercury's queer history. And the director that's chosen for it is someone who,
right.
attacks gay men.
Yes. Well, also, it also makes you wonder if they picked him to sort of smooth over the criticism that they were getting even before this film was made, that they would do that they would whitewash his
Right.
queer history.
They're like, oh, let's just pick a gay director.
Correct.
Who cares
Yeah.
if he has these assault allegations in his past?
Right. So that then they pick that director, and then they don't really have to go into it in the film because
Yeah.
it's sort of, and there is gayness in the movie, but this isn't my quote. I think our friend Chris Schleicher actually said this, which was they treat his gayness like a bug, not a feature. A lot of people said the movie was downright homophobic. I don't know if I would go that far, but it is. I understand where they're coming from.
My real question, too, is for Glad. Glad said that Bohemian Rhapsody is no longer up for a Glad Media Award. Why was it up for one in the first place? Every single person in Glad knows everything about Bryan Singer. They have heard about it
Yeah.
for years.
Yeah.
I think the other thing too, like anytime I look at the GLAAD, it's like there are a bunch of award shows where you're like the parameters for getting nominated seem a little unclear, and with GLAAD, it's like not all of the movies are like quote unquote or like movies about gay people. Sometimes
Right.
it's just like that actor is gay, although he plays a straight person in the film, so we're nominated. I'm like, how are we choosing these films?
Yeah, what is
GLAAD?
the orbit of gayness
Yeah,
here? How wide does it go?
quite make sense to me.
They're the MTV Movie Awards of gay awards. They
Yeah.
just want a celebrity to show up so they can get photos.
Because I feel like sometimes it's just movies with people who are like, have supported gay marriage. Nominate them for a GLAAD Media. Well, like it doesn't seem to make sense.
I'm surprised Pete Davidson wasn't nominated for
Oh.
playing a gay person and set it up.
With his two lines and his like girl or whatever he says. Oh no, he doesn't say girl. He's like, I'm gay. Can you believe it?
He probably would have if he was still with Ariana.
Right. See, there you go.
They would have been like, "You're nominated, Pete. We loved how you portrayed this gay man. Make sure you bring Ponytail with you."
Right. They would nominate him for Video of the Year somehow at the VMAs if they could, if that were the case.
Anyway, Bryan Singer is still working on an upcoming project. It is Red Sonja.
By the way, and that kills me because if you've seen the original Red Sonja with Brigitte Nielsen, arguably the most Danish person who ever lived, that is a movie worth remaking because it's a cool superhero-ish person in just a wretched movie.
Yeah.
It looks like everything was built out of like Joanne Fabrics material. It looks like bad. Yeah.
It's definitely something that deserves to be remade, and certainly not from him. I mean, Red Sonja is also a assault survivor
Right. Yep.
So
there's that.
it's just gross all around, and it's supposed to be this female empowerment movie. You can tell that the producer of the film, Avi Lerner, was obviously looking for something that could capitalize on Wonder Woman, but Wonder Woman was made by Patty Jenkins, and she has not been running around West Hollywood having sex parties. So I think there's a difference here.
One thing that is interesting with the Bryan Singer thing is I wonder the extent to which now we need one of these huge, splashy expose stories, because this one was kind of like, the Atlantic isn't the Washington Post or the New York Times or, New York Magazine or the New Yorker or anything like that. And because Bryan Singer is not the only one who's like slinking by, where we all know things about him and he's slinking by. He's one of the bigger names, but it's like, is that what it takes now that you have, like, Ronan literally has to write the story for anyone to care? Because this should have been like, oh shit, look at this long story detailing all of these things that have happened.
And then it has to
texting
be
Ronan right now. Please take care of Bryan Singer.
And then it has to be an expose written right now. It feels like there have been previous reports about Bryan Singer, but we needed a new official one that feels Twitter ready.
Yeah, but I mean that was like the Louis C.K. thing. Like everyone knew about Louis C.K., but it was like waiting and waiting for the New York Times story to drop so that we can all like, now we have something to talk about, or now it's like it focused the collective rage or whatever it is.
His dried semen was all over comedy.
Oh my God!
Dressing rooms.
Should I leave? Yeah.
What?
I've already left.
This planet. Yeah. Right.
So that begs the question of how much do you need to be confronted with for people to start having this conversation, and what sort of creates these Twitter conversations? Because is that what sort of cancels someone? Because also over the weekend there was Sundance, that snowy little film festival
where
that people love to go to.
50 Cent hawks vitamin water. I haven't been there since 2009. Is that still going on? Okay.
There was a Michael Jackson documentary that came out called Leaving Neverland.
And it sounds like Michael Jackson is over after this. Like, done.
Basically, it's a 2-part series about 2 individuals who accused Jackson of sexual abuse. It premiered last Friday, and we haven't seen it. And most of the general public hasn't seen it, but it started trending.
It sounds
because this
bad,
is a big documentary, and especially right after surviving R. Kelly, I feel like people are like, okay, now we got to have this conversation.
Well, the hard thing about this one, too, is, like, Michael Jackson is dead. Like, I actually think that, and I don't think this is a good thing, but I think his legacy is going to come out of this kind of okay. Like, I don't think you're going to stop hearing his music. And I think part of it is because he's dead, where you can't put him on trial. You can put Harvey Weinstein's on trial. You can ask these people to explain themselves, but like, because he's gone, people who don't want to accept that this happened, it's an easier argument to make, which is like, we really haven't heard his side. We really haven't heard him explain himself.
Leave it to me to not quote Mr. Kardashian. But when he was ranting before, he was like, you go cancel Leonardo da Vinci,
Right.
I mean, this is the thing where it's like, you go anywhere, you hear Michael Jackson music.
Yeah.
It's permeated our culture so much, and it's not like you can sort of do the mute R. Kelly movement is about, stopping him from continuing to profit off of his crimes and the behavior that he's had for decades.
Yeah.
This is sort of like, how are you stopping Michael Jackson's bag at this point?
And people already don't really want to cancel these dudes. Like, you see that with R. Kelly. Like, there's a bunch of people who were defending R. Kelly and who don't, not even just R. Kelly, like all of these men. And you've already seen them making comebacks. So many of these dudes, like I said, like a year ago, like they are going to be back. So you already have so many people who don't want to like make the effort to say like, okay, this is really some shit we're not tolerating. And so if they're not going to do it with R. Kelly, or they're not going to do it with Bryan Singer, they sure as shit aren't going to do it for Michael Jackson,
who arguably has the craziest fans of all time. I think number one.
Oh, of course. The Michael Jackson fans who are online right now defending him are the original stands.
Right. The dove
like,
releasers, yeah.
They make
Oh, the doves.
they
oh,
make
God.
the barbs look like Little Orphan Annie.
Yeah, right.
Um,
Completely benign.
they would march into the studio and kill us.
And if I do say so myself, they might be among the dumbest because, guys, Michael Jackson gave 100,000 statements about how he was innocent and everybody was coming to get him, and you fucking knew it was not true. You knew he was fucking bullshitting.
And it's wild too. Just I think because he's dead, there also won't be this excavation of maybe the people close to him and people who worked with him. Like if he was still alive, we'd be like, okay, what's going on with the record label? What's going on with the people who are in his videos? I mean, it's not that I ever want to say that people are responsible for anyone else, and certainly not making a woman responsible for any of this, but it is wild that no one ever asked Janet about this.
No.
And it's just sort of like an unspoken thing that, like, don't bring this up with Janet Jackson.
Right.
But also, if you can get an interview with her, like something miraculous has already occurred. You know
right.
what I mean?
She. What's weird is even as she's been doing press and had her comeback tour, it seems like she appears somewhere and then is whisked away to an island.
She whispers "thank you" into a small mic, strapped to her face, and then leaves. Yes.
Yeah. I assume it was bought, the documentary.
So Leaving Neverland is going to be airing on HBO,
Oof.
which means that everybody gonna see that shit.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Here's the new season of Game of Thrones, also a documentary about Michael Jackson being an abuser.
Also, question, in that big Quincy Jones interview from almost a year ago or whatever, did they go into it with him at all?
I don't recall.
I feel like he mostly was like, yeah, the Beatles, they can't play music. that
No,
was the
well,
rest
like
of that
they
interview.
don't. I mean, I think the thing with Quincy Jones too is like you know him fully. Like, one, it was like Thriller era. So one, it was before he got very. I mean, like obviously we don't know what he was doing the entire time, but it was like before he got super weird.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like such a musical relationship. You know what I mean? Like I feel like people, I wouldn't ask Quincy Jones about that.
Though he also did Bad, so that's the end of the 80s too.
True.
Yeah, but I think Bad was like the beginning of the.
Kara's right. I feel like the other just weird thing about the Michael Jackson stuff is it's not like a Bryan Singer thing where his career started sort of with, those allegations on the set of Apt Pupil.
Mm-hmm.
Like we've known that he has been preying on people for his entire career, it seems like. And Michael, I feel like we all grew up watching his music, and some of us were very young during like the Bad era, but we saw him transform into whatever was going on.
Right.
And all of the stories that have come out, there haven't been any that I've seen that have been like, when he was making Thriller, he was doing this.
Oh, right.
It was like it's later in his career
when Neverland actually happens.
Yes,
yeah.
When he built Neverland, and it seems like it was his mental state then and everything else going on with him. And so I feel like that's part of why people have been able to
it's also
compartmentalize it.
He, there was no TMZ. Like he was able to keep it secret. It's like someone like Sean Penn. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to find the extent of, like, things that we all know that he's done, but because you could call a newspaper and be like, don't publish that.
Right.
And they wouldn't do it. So the Michael Jackson stuff is, like, you can kind of believe that people had I don't know what he's doing in Neverland.
Right.
Until it all comes out.
Madonna alleges that nothing happened with her and Sean Penn, but people who say that they remember that New York Post story about when they allegedly got into a fight, that doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. Like, I remember reporters when we're trying to dig up that story, particularly Kate Arthur at BuzzFeed, and it just doesn't exist anymore.
It is crazy that we at one point actually really depended on tabloids because they were also so sensationalized that you could reasonably disavow a lot of the crazy headlines too, like because they were always saying like Liz Taylor about to die. Guess what? She didn't die till like 20 years later. Yeah. Meanwhile, then you got all the news from like Michael Jackson from there too. So it was a case of like, how right are they obligated to be, and how right are they?
Well, I'm sure we will be talking about the documentary when it comes out, and we'll see where things go from there.